Mary hers. Mary initially took the pajamas but quickly handed them back with a frown. I prefer the ones I wore before. They weren't this flimsy. I was taken aback by Mary's demand, but knew arguing would only lead to her throwing a tantrum, which would only complicate things further. Oh, was that so? Just wait a moment. With a sigh, I went off to look again, while my son, acting as if he knew nothing of it, let out a big yawn and headed to the bathroom, barely acknowledging me. While I was looking for the pajamas Mary had mentioned, John popped his head in curiously. Hey, do you know where my golf balls are? Oh, they're usually by the rack, aren't they? I can't find them. I pondered, tilting my head as I watched my husband John leave, and then I went to give Mary the new clothes. These are the ones. They really are worth the price. Indeed, these were bought specifically for Mary's frequent stays, during a shopping trip we had together. Mary, knowing she wasn't paying, had insisted on the expensive items, and I had given in and bought them. I'll go next, I don't want to follow an old person. Mary said nonchalantly, making me want to snap back, but just then, John returned to the living room, looking around helplessly. Still no luck? Mary, do you know where the golf balls that are usually by the rack are? John must have searched everywhere he could think of and decided to ask around as a last resort. Expecting a typical no-idea response, he was taken aback when she retorted. I don't know anything about that. Are you suggesting I stole them? That's terrible, suspecting me like that. Her loud denial surprised me, and I froze in shock. John tried to explain it was a misunderstanding, but Mary was already in a rage. Then Daniel, fresh from shower, came back, and we all tried to calm the situation, but Mary remained sulky and stormed off to the bathroom. The living room fell silent after Mary left, filled with a heavy atmosphere. Daniel was grilling John about what had happened. He was noting how unusual it was for Mary to be so flustered. But really, why did she get so angry? Given Mary's usual behavior, I couldn't help but suspect her. What's that supposed to mean? It sounds like you're accusing her. Before I knew it, Daniel and John had started arguing. Now it was up to me to calm down the fight between my son and husband, which took quite a bit of time. While this was happening, Mary, fresh from shower, returned to the living room, making things even more complicated. Now John was being criticized by both my son and his wife. But John didn't back down. Especially after John scolded Mary for her behavior today, she threw another tantrum and stormed off into the guest room we had prepared for her. Daniel, cutting off John's attempts to calm things, continued to yell. You're always blaming Mary, but you haven't apologized for suspecting her. You never really say sorry for anything, that's what I hate. With no end to the argument in sight, John eventually said do whatever you want, and retreated to his own room. The living room went silent again, and with a sigh, I decided to head to the bathroom. I'm going to bed, Daniel muttered gruffly, heading towards the guest room, but I stopped him. The guest room's bedding smells moldy, so sleep in my room, Daniel. Mary's behavior while my husband and son were out shopping, and her overreaction to John's words, made her appear suspicious to me. Because of this, I couldn't shake the feeling that her claim of cleaning my room was part of some scheme. I felt a bit bad for Daniel, but I decided to use the guest room meant for him this time. Your room? It's fine, I can handle a bit of mold. I'm not a kid anymore. What are you talking about? What if you get pneumonia? That's just it. No, fine, I got it. Daniel made a face of displeasure but resigned himself and headed towards my room. I briefly glanced at the guest room Mary was using, unaware of this exchange, naturally upset. If nothing was amiss, then that was fine. If all was well, I planned to properly prepare the guest room for my son tomorrow. Daniel opened the door to my room and entered. Wow! I heard Daniel's loud scream and rushed towards the room, opening the door that was nearly closed. I turned on the light in the still dark room and was speechless. There, my son was writhing on the floor, holding his foot, surrounded by a scattering of golf balls. The golf balls John had been searching for were strewn all over my room. In the dark, Daniel must have stepped on them. Who would expect golf balls to be scattered across the room? Daniel had stepped on them, lost his balance, and in trying to steady himself, he put his weight in the wrong place and ended up falling. It seems he hit the floor hard with his whole body during the fall. He was barely holding his foot, groaning softly while tears flowed. It seemed like the loud noise had drawn both John and Mary out of their rooms. John looked over my shoulder into the room and said, "What is this?" as he tried to help Daniel up. But John also got his foot caught on a golf ball and nearly fell over just like Daniel. I turned around to see what was happening. There stood Mary, pale-faced and trembling.
Why? How could this happen? This is your mother's room.
Her voice was so soft, it could have been drowned out by John's frantic questioning of Daniel if I hadn't been paying attention. "Yes, this is my room." "And Mary, you said you cleaned it today, didn't you?" My words made John and Daniel turn around, and Mary took a step back, flustered. "When you cleaned, did you see these golf balls?" I asked gently. Mary just stood there, trembling, silent. "Mary? Do you know anything about these golf balls?" Still, Mary remained silent.
"Hey, Mary! What's going on? Answer me!"
Daniel raised his voice, frustrated. But he was clearly in pain from hitting the floor so hard.
"I don't know. I didn't know you would be going into this room."
Mary shook her head in denial, stepping back as John murmured, "We have no choice but to call an ambulance and the police." At those words, Mary collapsed to the ground in despair. I immediately called for an ambulance and the police, then checked on Daniel. He was sitting on the floor, clutching his leg, struggling to breathe, his face flushed with anger. He responded to my questions, but his angry eyes were fixed on Mary the entire time. Eventually, the ambulance arrived, and I went to the hospital with my son, Daniel. After the examination, it turned out Daniel had fractured his leg and needed to be hospitalized. By the time we got to the hospital, his leg was swollen and had turned blue-black. It was a terrible sight. When I explained the situation, the nurses and doctor frowned and advised me to report to the police. I told them I had already done so and stepped out to contact my husband, John. John told me over the phone that the police had arrived and were currently taking his statement. Then the phone was handed to a police officer, who said they wanted to hear the full story later, and I agreed. According to John, Mary was just sitting on the floor, not responding to anyone during this time. I hung up and went back to Daniel's hospital room to get briefed on the hospitalization and then headed home to grab necessary items. When I returned home, there was a crowd around, making it difficult to enter. As soon as I managed to get inside, Mary started lashing out.
"Why not you? Why did Daniel have to go into that